Hey sis, why didn't you come to Mom's funeral?
What?
I can't believe my own sister wouldn't even come to our mother's funeral. You're so cold-hearted. It's awful, just awful. That's not something a decent person would do.
I was bewildered by the sudden phone call from my sister. That's because our mother had already passed away 3 years ago. We had a proper funeral. I didn't know what my sister was talking about. I'm married and working. I've been blessed with children. Since we both work, we make sure to give our children extra love and attention so they don't feel lonely. My husband is supportive in both housework and childcare, and I'm proud of our ideal family. I have a strong desire not to let my children experience the same things I did. My parents divorced when I was in elementary school, due to my mother's affair. My father found out about the affair because I told him. Though it's often thought that children will always side with their mother, that wasn't the case for me. My mother was far from the ideal mother figure everyone imagines. I have no memories of being loved by her. I have one younger sister, but my mother only doted on her. It was as if even spending time on housework was a waste. So all the housework was left to me. It's more accurate to say it was forced on me. My mother despised me for revealing her affair and hated me more than ever. She constantly berated me for telling, and I was left with physical and emotional scars. When the divorce was finalized, she took my sister and left. Still, thanks to my father and grandparents, I maintained a relationship with my sister where we met regularly. But as I entered middle school, the number of times I saw my sister decreased. I thought it was an adult issue, but it seemed my sister was avoiding meeting me for some reason. I asked her if I had done something to upset her after being turned down a few times. According to my sister, our mother told her that our family falling apart was my fault. From my mother and sister's perspective, I was the traitor to the family. My sister said that if she kept meeting a traitor like me, she would be the next one to be abandoned. She couldn't bear to contact or meet me behind our mother's back anymore. She wanted me to stop. I explained that our mother was the one who betrayed us first by cheating on our father and causing our family to fall apart. My sister knew about our mother's affair. It's just that I was the one who told our father. Even though she understood, she still insisted that I was the traitor to her, as she had to live with our mother. She wouldn't listen, saying it was my fault for not being able to turn a blind eye. During all this, my father remarried. I got a new stepmother. At first, it was awkward, but my stepmother tried her best to be the ideal mother figure. Seeing her efforts, I decided to cherish my new family and stepmother. I stopped contacting my sister, and before I knew it, we had completely drifted apart. I had no lingering feelings for my biological mother, who only loved my sister. I was allowed to go to college and secured a job. Just when I thought I could finally repay my father and stepmother, my father passed away in an accident. Even though we had grown distant, I informed my sister that our father, who was still her father, had passed away. However, my sister did not offer any words of condolence. After saying, "Serves him right," she laughed scornfully. "Ha ha 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 ha!" I thought she would still come to the funeral, but my biological mother and sister never showed up. However, when we discussed my father's inheritance later, my biological mother and sister suddenly appeared. Everyone present was taken aback by their flashy and inappropriate attire and makeup. Their heavy makeup made them barely recognizable as the mother and sister I remembered. I was surprised that they both seemed to enjoy dressing so ostentatiously. "At least tell us the date for deciding the inheritance. We had to check every day because we didn't know when it would start." From the end of the funeral until today, my mother had been watching nearby, hoping to participate in the inheritance discussions. I think she should have just shown up at the funeral instead. That's because the inheritance discussion was scheduled for today, as soon as possible after the funeral. Because of what you said, my poor little daughter had to suffer. You're going to give us a fair amount, right? Even though they divorced and lived separately, the children still had the right to inherit. I had no intention of refusing that. In the first place, my father's personal assets were not so large that they could be distributed among the family. I can earn my own money by working, and my stepmother is still young enough to continue working. She seems to be planning to work for a while longer, so even if I gave my father's property to my biological mother, my stepmother wouldn't struggle financially. Besides, I didn't want any more disputes, so I gave up my claim to my father's inheritance. What a stupid man! He made such a fuss about a simple affair and wanted a divorce. I agreed to the divorce because being with such a small-minded man made my own heart narrow, too.
Yeah, it wasn't our dad who dumped Mom. It was Mom who dumped our stingy dad. Poor big sister for living with such a father. My mother insulted and ridiculed my deceased father. Laughing crudely, my sister joined in, disparaging my father as well. My sister even dissed me, saying it was pitiful that I was raised by a father who was dumped. Neither of them showed any empathy or understanding for the sadness and loss my father experienced after being betrayed. You can say whatever you want about me, but please don't speak ill of our deceased father. What? What's the traitor saying? You're the root of all evil.
That's right. And what's with that plain look?
You don't look like you're in your 20s. You look older than your mom.
With that appearance, you probably don't have a boyfriend, right? If you can't attract a man, what's the point of being a woman? If you don't think so, then you're full of flaws as a woman. After an intense argument, my mother and sister told me, "Never contact us again," and stormed out. I couldn't feel anger or disappointment towards my mother and sister, who wouldn't consider others' opinions and only insisted on their own. It was utter emptiness. In that moment, their existence was erased from my life. After they left, there was silence for a while, but someone coughed and snapped me back into reality. The inheritance was then divided solemnly. Years later, my stepmother inherited the house my father left, and I continued living there. I wasn't sure, but I believed she was thinking about me. Even though I was an adult, my stepmother tried to be a mother figure for me. Her support made me very happy, but then she became ill and was hospitalized. "I'm sorry I didn't ask you to live with me, just so you could take care of me." "I know, but even if we lived separately, I would have taken care of you if you were hospitalized, so don't worry." I visited the hospital to take care of my stepmother during breaks from work. I didn't want to have any regrets like I did when my father was ill. You could call it self-satisfaction. Her time was limited, so I wanted to spend as much of it with her as possible. One man supported me through all of this. Before my stepmother's illness was discovered, we had been discussing marriage, but right before we decided to get married, her illness was revealed. I asked to put the marriage on hold for a while, but my partner said it would be better to reassure my stepmother, and his presence became indispensable to me. At the right time, I introduced him to my stepmother. He told my stepmother, "I'm looking forward to living together with the three of us. He's a wonderful person. I have to make sure I see you in your wedding dress on behalf of your father, too." It seemed to be her greatest joy, and she lived longer than initially expected. But a few days after my wedding, she passed away, joining my father. My stepmother was wealthy, and I inherited a large amount of money. 3 years later, and with what my stepmother left behind, I was able to build a happy family. However, my husband and I decided from the beginning of our marriage that we would continue working and live within our means, not relying on the inheritance. Today, as always, I went to work and I received a phone call from an unknown number on my personal cell phone. I thought it was a sales call or something and didn't answer. Then it calls again and again by the minute. Maybe they're calling without realizing it's wrong. I answered at the end of the day and found it was my sister, who I had broken up with.
Finally, why didn't you come?
What are you talking about?
How could you forget? Our mother's funeral, of course.
She seemed to be crying heavily. What are you talking about? Our mother's funeral was 3 years ago.
Huh?
She paused for a moment and then continued angrily.
Oh, maybe your stepmother died too. I'm talking about our real mother. And calling someone you're not even related to mother is disgusting.
I was irritated, but I ignored her attitude, realizing that losing her mother must have been a huge shock to my sister. To me, my real mother was my stepmother, who had married a man with a child and became a mother to a middle school student overnight. I didn't fully understand this until I had a family of my own, but I think the period of nurturing a life within oneself is a time for a mother to develop self-awareness and commitment. Of course, I am aware that many people can build wonderful family relationships, even without a blood connection, such as through adoption. However, becoming a mother to a middle schooler all of a sudden is certainly not an easy task, no matter how you think about it. When I consider the efforts and anxieties of my stepmother, all I can feel is gratitude. I am forever indebted to the stepmother who raised me, and she is the image of the mother I strive to be. Blood connections are trivial. In reality, the so-called real mother my sister refers to never even looked at me. So when I hear the word mother, I think of my stepmother who raised me, not my birth mother. I was not dumbfounded. I genuinely believed she was talking about my stepmother. Finally understanding my sister's words, I replied in a disinterested manner, "Oh, I see." I could hear what sounded like her banging or stomping on something over the phone.
What? That indifferent attitude? The funeral is over. It's terrible not to attend your own relative's funeral. What a cold-blooded person. You must not have red blood in you.
Although she made a valid point, my sister also didn't attend our relative's funeral. Moreover, our deceased father loved both my sister and me equally. I believe he was more affectionate than my mother. Not only did my birth mother and sister not attend my father's funeral, but they also snatched his inheritance and insulted and despised him. If you ask me, I think those two are the ones without red blood flowing in them. Indifferent. Well, we are strangers, aren't we?
Huh?
You interfered with the inheritance even though you didn't attend Dad's funeral, right? Weren't you the one who said never to contact you again? And I just found out about our mother's passing now, you know? After a brief silence, my sister uttered a small,
"Ah, I forgot. I meant to inform you about the funeral."
Well, I'm glad you remembered. I'm going to renounce all the inheritance related to that mother, so you can do whatever you want with it. I said just that and hung up the phone. However, my sister, perhaps lacking comprehension, contacted me again a few days later.
"Help me, Katie. It seems our mother hinted at marriage to various men. Isn't that like marriage fraud? They're yelling at me to pay compensation if I don't want to be sued. I'm being yelled at a lot."
Well, just pay them.
"If I could, I wouldn't be calling you. Didn't you hear me say various men? It's not just one or two. Some of them seem pretty sketchy, too."
That's tough. But remember, you were the one who said never to contact you again. Furthermore, it should have been known that our mother was promiscuous with men, since she cheated on our father while he was still alive. In fact, she didn't have just one affair. If it had been only one person, our father might have forgiven her, thinking it was just a momentary lapse of judgment. Only our father would know the truth. There might be a possibility that I couldn't accept my mother, who had multiple relationships, as a mother. That's because my father tried to adopt my sister several times through a lawyer. But I was told that my sister didn't want to leave, so I gave up on that idea. My sister wanted to stay with our irresponsible mother, even though she saw her up close. Even if our mother had imprinted on her, my sister still wanted to be with her. twisting the memories we both shared. It's fair to say that not being able to leave even after becoming an adult is equally guilty. There's no room for sympathy here.
Well, that's...
And you were the one who called me a traitor all along. I don't need a sister who calls me a traitor. You are the one who declared us strangers first. I don't need you coming around now acting all like family. It's a nuisance. Don't ever contact me again. We're strangers after all. I hung up the phone without checking my sister's reaction. I blocked her number and went back to the house where my family was waiting. Later, I received a call from my biological mother's relatives. I thought we were done, but they apologized for the rudeness my mother and sister had shown me, so I decided to hear them out. The relatives remembered how harshly my mom treated me and were shocked that she could shamelessly claim my father's inheritance after we had separated. They apologized profusely for allowing the visit during a time when my grief had not yet healed. But that's all in the past now. Next, they talked about my sister. Apparently, she's just as irresponsible with men as our mother. Ever since my sister came back, they had warned her numerous times that she would eventually suffer if she didn't change her ways. But instead of changing, my sister became just like our mother, and they could no longer control her. Our mother got involved with bad men, and my sister was being forced into criminal activities, feeling cornered. My sister was also dating multiple men at the same time, leading to several intense confrontations. Unable to handle it anymore, the relatives declared that they would cut off their relationship if their advice wasn't heeded, and then our mother died. As my sister is an adult, they decided to continue with cutting off the relationship. But right after our mother's funeral, another confrontation occurred. Since then, her whereabouts have been unknown. They advised me not to get involved with her anymore. I didn't plan on it anyway. However, I can't help but feel sorry for her, as there might be some room for sympathy regarding the criminal activities she was forced into. But there must have been a way for her to atone. If she didn't take that path, then I guess it's her own fault. That's what I decided to think. After hanging up the phone, I heard the sound of my husband and children laughing happily in another room. I want to protect this family. So I decided to live my life, using my biological mother and sister as negative examples.
Erin, you've really aged. Women over 40 are pretty much done for, aren't they?
I think so too. Compared to the moms of other kids in my class, she's the oldest, and it's embarrassing.
Yeah, I get it.
Mom doesn't need to come to school events anymore. It's better if only Dad comes.
I totally understand how you feel, Paul. To be honest, I regret marrying her.
Right.
Recently, my husband Joseph and our son Paul have been having these kinds of conversations right in front of me. I am Erin, 42 years old. I live with my husband, who's 5 years younger than me, and our 10-year-old son. Joseph works for a cosmetics company. Both my parents have passed away, but Joseph's are still alive. Joseph's brother and his family live with his parents. They have 5 kids, so his parents are too busy with their grandchildren to pay much attention to us. In a way, it's easier than them meddling too much, so I don't really mind. Joseph used to be very caring kind when we got married, but now he treats me like I'm just middle-aged. Paul, growing up seeing this, has started to speak rudely to me, imitating Joseph. No matter how much I scold him, he doesn't listen because Joseph just laughs it off.
But Dad says it's good to be honest about everything.
It's not nice to say things that hurts others. Didn't your teacher scold you recently for that? Paul recently made a girl in his class cry by calling her ugly. I had just been contacted and scolded by his teacher about it. It happens too often. I blame his father, who never scolds him. They're truly like father, like son. But Paul is only 10. I worry about what he'll become in the future if he is like this now. Even as an adult, it hurts to hear such things. Being called old or ugly every day by the only two family members have really gets me down. I quit my job to get married and raise Paul. But once he started elementary school, I took a part-time job at a supermarket. Actually, that's where I met Joseph. We started talking after seeing each other there a few times, and that led to dating and then marriage. I used to be a full-time employee at the main branch of the supermarket, but now I work part-time at a branch within walking distance from our home. Lately, I've been working weekends too, and the manager is happy about it. Are you sure it's okay? What about your husband and son? It's a big help that you can work on weekends. Yes, my husband takes care of our son. Your husband sounds great. That's the usual response when I say that. Indeed, Joseph often takes Paul out on weekends. But it's more like they're treating me as a nuisance than looking after him. Aaron doesn't need to come with us.
Yeah, it's more fun just with Dad.
It would be embarrassing if people thought Aaron was part of the family.
I don't want people to think my mom is someone as ugly as her.
That's what they say about me. So he's far from a good husband.
If you give me more allowance, I might go out with you,
Paul sometimes says. That must be Joseph's influence. I already give you a monthly allowance.
It's not nearly enough.
Telling him to spend it more wisely doesn't help. He almost always spends it all on the same day he gets it. It goes on snacks and games, just frivolous things. An ugly woman should stay home alone.
It's Mom's fault. She doesn't give me enough allowance.
Saying that, Joseph and Paul left again today. I've been working on weekends lately, but the manager told me to take a break and relax with my family for once, and I couldn't refuse bluntly. I felt too embarrassed to admit to him that I was being ostracized by Joseph and Paul. After finishing the cleaning and laundry, I let out a big sigh. Having nothing else to do, I thought about going shopping for the first time in a while. A little stroll outside would be a nice change of pace. I enjoyed some window shopping, but then realized I didn't particularly want anything. Before I knew it, I found myself in front of a restaurant we used to visit often when Paul was still in preschool. Back then, Paul didn't talk back like he does now, and Joseph was still kind. I almost teared up thinking about those times. No matter how fondly I recall the past, it won't change the present. I left the place with that thought. A bit further away, I heard a familiar voice and turned around. What? There were Joseph and Paul with an unfamiliar woman, looking like a happy family, entering the restaurant without noticing me. Who was that woman? Paul was smiling at her, a smile he had never shown me. Back home, the image of Paul's smile kept flashing in my mind. Their close behavior didn't seem like they had just met yesterday. Had Joseph and Paul been meeting that woman on their outings? Then the worst thought crossed my mind. Was she Joseph's? When Joseph and Paul returned home that night, they acted as usual. I guess meeting that woman had become routine for Paul, so I decided to ask Paul first, wanting to know what Joseph told him about her. Hey, Paul, I saw you with Dad and a woman I don't know yesterday. Who is she?
Ah, you saw? She's much prettier than Mom, right?
Dad's friend?
No, she's Dad's girlfriend.
What?
That's what Dad said. He told me to keep it a secret from you, Mom. But now that you've seen it, can't help it. If you were as pretty as her, I'd have gone out with you too.
I was speechless at Paul's words, smiling, and shocked that Joseph had brazenly introduced his affair to Paul. I couldn't pretend not to know anymore. That night, I confronted Joseph with what I saw and what Paul said, planning to discuss it away from Paul, but Joseph said there was no need to hide it since Paul knew everything already, so we talked in the living room. Paul sat on a kitchen chair, silently listening. I had no choice but to ask about the woman. Joseph admitted to the affair without hesitation. I was actually thinking of talking about it soon. What do you mean? Layla is crazy about me and desperately wants to marry me. To do that, I need to divorce you. Layla is 12 years younger than you, Aaron. She's 30 and beautiful. Anyone would say she's the better choice, right? But taking your child to meet your mistress? What are you thinking? I thought it'd be better for Paul to get used to his new mom. What? Hey, Paul, what do you want? To live with this woman? Or your new mom? Which one?
I obviously want to live with Dad and my new mom. The nuisance should just leave.
Paul! I felt like being hit in the head with a hammer. I never thought Paul would say such things to me. But this house was left to me by my father. I have no reason to leave. I was about to say that when Joseph spoke first. Paul, this house was built by Mom's dad. So if we divorce, we won't live here anymore.
Is that so?
But, Paul, do you want to live here? In this old-fashioned shack?
What will we do then?
We have the new mom's house.
We can live in that beautiful apartment?
That's right. That will be better for Paul, wouldn't it?
Of course. So old mom and the old house, we don't need them anymore.
You got it, Paul, just like my son. Joseph's mistress had apparently lost her parents too, but she owned a beauty salon with her inheritance and was quite well off. Joseph had become close to her after making a deal to supply his company's cosmetics to her salon, and he was planning to quit his job and become an executive at her salon after divorcing me and marrying her. I was astonished that things had progressed that far. If Paul prefers Joseph's mistress over me, there's nothing I can do. I agreed to the divorce, exhausted and without the will to hold back. Of course, I demanded alimony, but Joseph just laughed. If it can be settled with money, it's cheap. Layla will pay. This way, I can finally be free of you, Aaron. Paul laughed alongside Joseph. After I signed the divorce papers, Joseph and Paul left looking happy. Watching them go, I felt my heart growing colder. Had I become such a boring person that they could look down on me like this? I thought I had tried my best for Joseph and Paul. Feeling pathetic that this was the result, I decided to forget them. There was no point in staying down. It was foolish to waste any more of my life for them. I was glad I had a part-time job. Having a place to work felt incredibly reassuring. And 3 months after the divorce, I was offered a full-time position. I was so happy. Discarded like trash by Joseph and Paul, finding a place that recognized and needed me was a relief. I decided to work hard and live my life seriously. 5 years passed, and one day, my doorbell rang insistently. When I rushed to answer, 2 shabby men were standing there. At first, I thought they were beggars, but who would beg at someone's house these days? Then the younger man said, "Mom, I've missed you. Who are you?" "It's me, Paul." "I've missed you too, Aaron." It was Joseph and Paul. They had become thin, haggard, and unkempt, completely different from 5 years ago. Paul, who was 10 then, was now 15, a 9th grader. Teenagers grow fast. I wouldn't have recognized him under normal circumstances, but why were they here now, looking like this? The house has really changed. It's so impressive now. Aaron, where did you hide all this money? That's none of your business. Hey, Let's get back together.
What nonsense are you talking about?
Apparently, they had tried to rely on Joseph's family, but 5 grandchildren, the eldest in college, it was the most financially demanding time for them. They couldn't afford to help and didn't want to be burdened by Joseph and Paul, so they were turned away. Mom, help me.
What?
Who's your mom? Mom, don't you recognize me? It's Paul. Have you forgotten your own son?
Well, I don't know. As I said before, I don't have a son. Did you need something?
Aaron, are you still holding a grudge about what happened 5 years ago? It's all in the past, isn't it?
The past?
Deep down, you wanted us to come back, right? You've been waiting, haven't you? Hearing this, I realized that I had barely thought of them at all over these 5 years. They had already become strangers to me.
Aren't you happily remarried to that young, wealthy woman?
Can't you see how far we looked at? That's not the case. Even if he said that, it was none of my concern. I had no interest in their appearance or situation. Then, perhaps seeking sympathy, Joseph began to cry and talk. He explained how Lila's beauty salon had gone bankrupt in its 3rd year, how they were being sued because they've taken high payments for treatments in advance, and how there were unpaid wages and lawsuits from former employees. He kept talking, unasked. Leila was working nights, but blamed Joseph for not doing enough sales, forcing him to work part-time at a grocery store and as a day laborer at construction sites to pay off debts. Paul was burdened with all the household chores, allowed only 1 meal a day, and told to drop out and work.
So what? How is any of that my concern?
Help us! Leila hasn't been home for a week. All my earnings go to debt payments, and without Leila's income, we have nothing to eat.
I don't care about your problems.
I always preferred you to her. Dad betrayed you, so it's understandable you're angry, but I'm your son. Aaron, are you betraying me?
I was just a kid taken away by Dad. Please, Mom, let me stay here. I want to go to high school and I'll use my allowance wisely. Allowance?
To think they expected me to feed them, send Paul to school, and even give him an allowance? And not a single word of apology from either of them? Like father, like son. I am your son, Mom. You can't abandon me. A mother can't ignore her struggling son. Paul, you planning to come back here alone?
Well, Dad's divorced from you, so he's a stranger now, but it's different from me.
Do you even know the truth, Paul? The truth? Paul is just like me, a stranger to Aaron. Even if Paul wants to live comfortably here, I won't let him do that. What do you mean? Paul's biological mother had passed away shortly after he was born. For a while, Joseph's parents took care of him, but they couldn't manage with their own young kids. Eventually, they gave up. That's when Joseph, with baby Paul, started coming to our supermarket. I felt sorry for him and ended up marrying him on Paul's first birthday. I thought of Paul as my own son and decided to raise him with care. Initially, Joseph was grateful and helped around the house, and I was glad to be married. But as Paul started elementary school, Joseph stopped helping and started saying, "You're cold to him because he's not your flesh and blood," whenever I scolded Paul for misbehavior. It became harder to scold Paul after hearing that so often, and so Paul became a child who spoke rudely and looked down on others. I tried my best to correct his behavior, but Joseph's tacit approval only made Paul more disrespectful. Moreover, after Paul chose Joseph's mistress over me as his mother, any maternal feelings I had for him had vanished. That's why I felt no sympathy for Paul now, pleading for help while arguing with Joseph. I realized I could never be his mother. Maybe we were never that close after all. Some families are close despite not being blood related. But I couldn't be that way. And I didn't want to become his mother again. That was my honest feeling, and there was nothing I could do about it. Can you two, who are unrelated to me, stop standing in front of my house in such a shabby state? It's a nuisance, so please leave. That's harsh. What if at that time? What? 5 years ago, if you had said you wanted to live with me, even without blood ties, I was ready to go through any hardship to raise you. Mom, you chose to leave me first, Paul, so I am no longer your mother. Don't come here again, and you too, Joseph. At my words, Paul and Joseph both slumped their shoulders. Then as I said those words, my husband Brian came home. What's wrong?
Welcome home.
Aaron, you remarried? Yes, 2 years ago. Who are they? Some people from the past, but they were just leaving. I had told Brian about my divorce and my son. He probably realized that these two were my former family. Without saying a word to them, Brian turned his gaze back to me. I'm home. What's for dinner?
Your favorite meat and potatoes.
Looking forward to it. Let's go inside. You're done here, right? Brian put his hand on my back and glared at them. They stood there stunned, but I entered the house with Brian, closing the door behind us. Later, Joseph's wife was arrested for fraud. Apparently, as their business struggled, they pretended to use high-quality cosmetics but actually diluted them with water or switched them to cheap drugstore products, selling them as their own luxury brand. An employee who did not receive his salary filed a complaint. Joseph, being in charge of oversight, couldn't escape liability for damages. Paul, though he graduated from middle school, didn't go to high school and was working part-time somewhere. Joseph came asking for money, but of course, I turned him down. Brian is a department head at the supermarket's headquarters. Brian, too, is remarried. His previous wife passed away from illness 3 years into their marriage. Over 20 years ago, they had no children. I think I wouldn't have remarried if Brian had children. It's not because I dislike parenting. I couldn't properly raise the only child I had. I didn't get to see him grow up. That's why I thought I couldn't be a mother again. Brian understands my feelings. When I said I wanted to live in the house left by my parents, he agreed and renovated it for us. He's always thoughtful and kind, and I want to stay by his side forever.